Majors, who's a Libertarian running for the office of mayor in the District of Columbia. And since it's our political season, I've been trying to have as many candidates on as possible. So, Mr. Majors, thank you for joining us on the Education Town Hall today.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Listen, I want to do as I normally do with all candidates, and that is give you an opportunity to tell us why you are running for the office of mayor of the District of Columbia.
Well, I'm running partly to raise issues about education and education choice, but more broadly, I think D.C. has an uncompetitive political marketplace. We've had only really one party in D.C. We've had a lot of corruption. I think that's partly because we only have one party. It's easy to turn a blind eye to people when they're in your own party and not do anything about them. So we'd like for D.C. to have more parties, not only as many as other states, but even more than other states, and have more political competition. So I ran for office 2 years ago to get us enough votes to get us permanent ballot status with a lot of help from a lot of people. That worked out. This time we're running 9 candidates, almost as many as the Democrats and more than the statehood Greens or the Republicans. We have somebody running for every city council seat, all the shadow seats, mayor. We don't have anybody for delegate or attorney general, but we have somebody in almost every other race. And a lot of them will be talking about education. One of them, Martin Moulton, who's one of our shadow candidates, has actually worked in education issues in D.C. a lot.
Okay. So let me ask you, are you a native Washingtonian?
I'm not a native Washingtonian. Some of our candidates are. I've lived here since 1980, which is longer than I've lived anywhere else, like 35 years.
Oh, okay. So what ward of the city do you live in?
I live in Ward 2 right now.
Ward 2?
I was going through all the addresses I've lived at in the 34 years I've been in D.C., trying to figure out how many different wards I'd lived in. I've lived in at least 4. There's a chance I've lived in 5 different wards. I've lived in 2, 3, 6, and I think I lived in 4. But, you know, the ward boundaries have shifted over the past 34 years. So I used to live at 13th and Emerson Northwest, up sort of in 16th Street Heights, Brightwood. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was Ward 4 then or not. I'm not sure what ward it was when I lived there.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, have you always been a Libertarian?
Pretty much so. I've became one in high school. I was really active with them in high school and college, and when I first moved to D.C., there was a period during the Clinton years where I got sort of active with a bunch of friends of mine who were Democrats, and I did a lot of Democratic fundraisers, and I was a real estate agent at the time and made probably more money than I make now, and I gave money to Democrats, which you can find on opensecrets.org. But around 2003 or 2004, I sort of decided to go back to my Libertarian roots and to try to get more Libertarian stuff going on here. Libertarians basically believe in individual rights and that everybody owns their own body and life, and all our
You read my mind because I was going to ask you to share that with us. Okay.
All our political policy positions come from that. It's almost a deductive thing. But some people around, I guess around 2011, started coming at me and asking me if I would run for office, for a local office, when Gary Johnson was running for office as a presidential candidate, because they wanted to get the 7,500 votes you need so that your party has permanent ballot status, and people who want to register as a Libertarian can. And we're happy that now we're actually the fastest growing, although very small, political party in D.C. because our membership grows about 10% every month. About 50 people register as a Libertarian every single month since they were able to do so, which was last March when they finally printed up their registration forms.
Let me ask you. Oh my goodness, that is not good. My question came and went just that quickly, but let me move on to my next question. And we want to focus, because this is an education town hall, so I want to focus on education. And so let me start by asking you, how would you rate the state of schools in the District of Columbia?
Well, you know, you kind of don't have to, because if you talk to anybody on the school board, and I have in the past several years, we actually know that D.C. spends more money than almost any jurisdiction in the United States per pupil on the education system. I don't want to say on education because I don't think it's actually going to the children, or for that matter, even to the teachers. I think it's going somewhere else, and we really need to know where. anyway, we spend more money than probably anywhere else. New York City may be a close second, and we seem to get less results from it because apparently the rates for people who don't graduate in 4 years or don't graduate at all are up in the 40s. So they're pretty high. They're like higher than most places. Mm-hmm. So something's wrong where we're not getting our bang for our buck. And this is one of the points where actually education connects up to a bunch of other issues in D.C. And I noticed that you all on your blog had said on my blog the only issue I talked about so far is education, and that is because it's sort of the most important issue, and D.C.'s embroiled in this lawsuit now where the charter schools are suing the D.C. government. We're all going to have to pay for that lawsuit.
Well, since you mentioned it,
sure.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think we should be spending just as much on charter schools, and for that matter, just as much on per pupil on the children who get the opportunity vouchers as we do on public schools. And I think the fact that we're not may mean that somebody is benefiting off the money when it stays within the traditional public school system, because it doesn't seem that the kids are benefiting from it. So somebody else must be tapping into it.
So you want to give other entities an opportunity to get access to the money? Is what you're saying?
I want all children who are getting their education funding from the D.C. government to get equal funding with no discrimination, regardless of where they choose to learn. Mm-hmm. They should all be treated equally. Okay. And I think that's what that law school is about. But what I was going to say is, this is a point where the education issue touches to probably what's also one of the biggest issues in D.C., which is transparency. Why can't we see easily, everybody, the whole D.C. government budget, but especially the education budget? Why can't we see where the money's going? Why can't we see online so everybody can see it, or almost everybody? Why can't we see how much is being actually spent to educate a child and how much is being spent to pay for other jobs that don't have anything to do directly with educating a child? Why can't we see where all the money's going?
Let me ask you this. Do you know Mary Levy?
I don't know Mary Levy.
Okay, I think you need to know Mary Levy. She can answer those questions. She is the financial guru and has been for many years in the DCPS. So she knows where every dollar is, every dollar goes, and where every dollar should go.
And that's great. And there are also groups in D.C. from a variety of different viewpoints, like the D.C. Fiscal Policy Institute, that study those things.
Yes.
But my question is, in this day and age, when you could put stuff like that online, and not just for education, but the whole D.C. budget, so all voters could see it, why isn't that done?
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that suggestion. However, all voters wouldn't be able to see it, because there are a number of voters sitting right here in this community that you're in that don't have access.
That's true, although you can go to Martin Luther King Public Library and look things on a computer there. I've done it before. But it's still a case that I don't think most people in D.C. know where any money goes. And if they did, I think then we would know why we're spending way over $20,000 per pupil on kids in the public school system, and they don't seem to be getting anything from it. And back to your original question about how do I think D.C. is rating. One of my little pet peeves is there are all these groups, and they rank states, all the states in the union, some of them rank countries, and they rank them on all kinds of things. Job growth, there's something called the Index of Economic Freedom. They rank them on who's got the most debt and who's got the lowest taxes and all that kind of stuff. And I would love to see D.C. ranked in all those rankings that all these groups do. There's a group at George Mason University called the Mercatus Center that does this kind of stuff. And I look at their tables all the time. I'm fascinated in that kind of issue. D.C.'s always left out. And I know that they're not the federal government, but what I would like to know is all our D.C. elected representatives who are lobbying all the time for statehood and for D.C.'s inclusion and for the TSA to recognize that our driver's licenses are driver's licenses too, and all these other problems, I would like to see somebody lobbying these nonprofit groups that please include D.C. Now, I know one reason they might not want to do it is because D.C. might not always come out so well, but we need to know. So all those groups that are ranking states, I'm appealing to them, but I'm also appealing to people like Delegate Norton and everybody else to lobby those groups. When they rank any group, any kind of group from any perspective, when they do rankings of states and they say,
Okay.
Missouri is 32nd. I wish they would rank D.C. as well.
I don't want to get bogged down into that because that takes us away from what I want to talk about. You mentioned something a moment ago, and I want to go back to it. You mentioned that we spend over $20,000 per pupil. I have to ask where you get your numbers. I've been around. I've been in education advocacy for a long time. I've never heard that number, so I need to ask where you got that number from.
Everybody comes up with slightly different numbers.
You're right about that.
And although in the lawsuit we may actually get some discovery and may get more information on numbers because everybody agrees who's doing this lawsuit that the amount that goes to people in charter schools is thousands of dollars less than the amount that's supposedly going to kids or that's being given to the public school system per pupil for public school. There's a group called the National Center for Education Statistics. It came out with actually that DC spends $29,000. I've had some other people look at...
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I think... I haven't actually talked to anybody at that group yet, and I'm going to, but I think what they must be doing, and this is actually how a business would do the accounting, or anybody sort of in the private sector would do the accounting, I think they must be imputing, adding into the number, essentially the free rent that DC public school systems get because they own their own building. So they don't pay rent. So I think probably the DC public school system comes up with some figure that's like $17,000 per pupil.
So you said it as if there's something wrong with that. They don't pay rent.
It's just that if you're going to do a comparison of number to number, if a charter school is paying rent for its space, and you can say, well, it's paying $1,000 per pupil for rent, or whatever the number would be, you have to then, if you're going to compare the traditional public school to the charter school or any other kind of school, you have to figure out what is it getting essentially because it has these buildings that doesn't pay property taxes on it, doesn't pay rent on. Isn't
that one of the trade-offs for charter schools having autonomy and having the right for self-determination?
I'm not saying that DC public schools should try to figure out how to pay rent to themselves. I'm just saying that when you think about what's being spent per pupil on a public school, and then you're thinking what's being spent per pupil on a charter school, you have to take into account the fact that it's not just the per pupil budgeted money given that year to the public school. There's also the fact that they are essentially given, not that year, but permanently, millions or billions of dollars worth of free real estate and free rent.
So we've got a short time left. I want to get into quickly some other things real quick. So it sounds like you are definitely a school choice guy. Is that correct?
I am, and although the current sort of social revolution that's going on in D.C. is that almost half the kids have opted to leave and go to charter schools, and apparently on the DCPS website it says there are 22,000 who are even waiting to do that transition, and they can't because there aren't enough charter schools to go around. I'm also in favor of upping the education opportunity voucher, finding some way to empower people who want to do homeschooling, and also another situation we have in D.C. that decreases jobs in D.C. Independent schools, completely independent ones, are regulated by a different body from what regulates charter and public schools, and the regulations are more extreme. They have to have more bathrooms, more staff, they have to have cots that are up off the ground instead of mats on the floor for nap time, and I think those regulations should be equal.
So there are a number of people around the city that believe that there should be a moratorium on the continued proliferation of charter schools. I take it you don't agree with that.
So in other words, they believe that people who want to go to a charter school should be denied that choice. They believe that a voter should be denied the right to do what they want to with their own life.
Well, I won't speak, but I'm just saying what I hear.
Yeah, I'm completely opposed to a moratorium.
Okay, and that's what I wanted. Okay, I'm trying to get you.
I think we've already essentially had a moratorium. I think like in the past couple of years, there have only been a couple of new ones that have been approved.
Yeah. Well, I want to get this final question in. In 2007, there was a governor's change where under mayor control. So give me your thoughts about has it been effective? Has it not been effective? What are your thoughts around the governance model itself?
I didn't understand the question. Sorry.
Okay. Back in 2007, the legislation put the schools under the control of the mayor. You're running for mayor,
right.
So what has it been effective?
There's so many things that are talked about in this campaign that Catania and Bowser and other people have talked about that I think are actually just not the real issue. Because that's saying, here are the public schools. There are a very scarce supply of them, especially a scarce supply of good public schools that everybody wants to be into. And now we're all going to politically fight about who controls them and who gets to decide which kid gets to go to one of the good public schools. I'm not about that. I'm about increasing the supply of other options that people can choose. And I think all those, which are the charter schools and independent schools, I think that's like a secondary, irrelevant debate.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now because we've run out of time. This conversation just went by
Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming by, folks. We've been talking with Bruce Majors, who's a Libertarian running for the office of Mayor of the District of Columbia. Thank you for coming. Safe travels on the campaign trail. Feel free to come back because all are welcome here on the Education Channel.
Come back anytime.
Fantastic.